Hello and welcome to another episode of I Remember the Inland Empire. I'm Chuck Street. I will be the host for today's program. And we are going to talk about a very innovative program for its time called Tel Med. Tel Med was an entity that provided healthcare information and made it available on the telephone. And we'll talk about how that happened and how it started. The innovator, the creator of Tel Med was a man by the name of Ray Saar, who lived in San Bernardino. He was an aerospace engineer. And this idea started in his head and then eventually expanded to most of the United States and then other parts of the world too. Joining me today is Raymond Saar's oldest son, Dick Saar. So we're going to talk about Tel Med and how it all started, and specifically about Raymond Saar, who was a truly interesting man. So Dick, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Now, did I describe Tel Med? What a person could do is they could call a toll-free number, telephone number, and then a live operator would answer, and the person who was calling would ask if they had a recording about a certain subject. It could be measles, it could be a dental problem or whatever, because they had hundreds of pre-recorded tapes that the operator would slide into a machine, and then that tape would play on the telephone for the caller. Is that correct, Dick?
That is correct. That's from a list you got in your doctor's office. They had a little printed pamphlet that you could pick up on the table there and give you all the different subjects, medical subjects, from bee bites to breast cancer, everything in between.
Well, eventually there were hundreds of these recordings, and the original scripts were provided by physicians, and then they would be edited, and then they would be narrated. I actually had the pleasure of narrating about a half a dozen of them. But most of them were narrated by a very talented disc jockey, air personality by the name of Doug Collins, who will join us a little bit later on just to talk about his experience with Tel Med. So, Dick, let's talk about your dad, who really was a very, very interesting man. He was an engineer, a physicist, right, by training.
Right.
And he was originally from the Ohio area, from Cleveland.
Yes.
As was your mother, and they were a dynamic duo. Your mother's name was Maggie, or Margaret Saar, but we called her Maggie. And so really, this innovation was something that had its beginnings out of desperation. Your father had been an aerospace engineer for a couple of decades. At the time all of this came together, he had been working for TRW, an aerospace a company that had a presence at Norton Air Force Base, and he was working on guided missile programs and a lot of other things he couldn't even talk about because they were top secret. So the aerospace industry was winding down. We'd already been to the moon a few times, and so the budgets were shrinking, and then suddenly your dad found himself out of a job. So tell us what happened then, because you were there, you lived in the same house, you have 4 brothers and sisters, and tell us what happened there.
Well, we saw our father go from getting up and putting on a suit every day and going to work, all of a sudden not having a job in the aerospace industry, and he had a family to feed and mortgages and bills, and he would look for work all the time and wasn't real. There were so many engineers out of work that there wasn't work in his line of business. So he would he took a job as a janitor for the city of San Bernardino. He was cleaning out buildings at night. Here's a man with a degree in he was a physicist. He was a rocket engineer. He was pushing a broom. And then he started, but that wasn't for very long. I mean, it seemed like a long time for us, but he would go put on his suit and tie in the morning, and shave and start going to the library and sit there and think of ways that he could look for a job in his head, or I don't know the process he was going through, but he invented a job for himself through Tel Med. He invented that job out of thin air. He thought, well, what do people need? And people needed medical care. Poor people needed medical care. Everybody needs medical care, but he thought about the person at home with limited means and needing information. And how could that person get it for free and anonymously?
So this was before the internet. So this is long before the internet. And so this was a portal, so to speak, to where they would have access to this well-vetted medical information that was relevant to the caller.
Exactly. Where was the young, and he said this to me one time, he goes, where was the young girl who needed information on birth control gonna go if she could not go to her mother? Because she was terrified that the thought of her mother thinking of the daughter as sexually active, she just couldn't handle that. So she couldn't go and ask anybody for this information. And this was a place to get it. Or, like I mentioned, if somebody got bit by a bee and the parent didn't know what to do, they could get that in. They could get information across the spectrum of medical health just by having that pamphlet, that free pamphlet that they picked up, and anonymous. It was very important to him that it was anonymous, that nobody knew who anybody else was.
Now, this new delivery system, at least for these medical topics, the delivery system wasn't totally new. I think it was inspired by astrology, right? And maybe you could, there was, at that time, there were some services that presented themselves where you could call a number. There was a number specific to your astrology sign, and you could call and get your daily horoscope, right?
Right, I remember that, yes. But I don't know how much this is related to. It seems to be right along the same lines and the same delivery system, anonymous again. But I don't know how closely those two relate to each other. It almost seems like the same thing.
But he wanted to do something that was meaningful and helpful to humanity.
Yes, that was him. Yeah.
Yeah. So now it wasn't, so he got the idea, and then he had to sell it. He had to create this job for himself. And in just a couple of minutes, we'll introduce Doug Collins, who again was a local radio personality, did the morning show on KFXM 590 AM. And in fact, why don't we go to Doug right now? So Doug, I know you're waiting in the wings. Could you tell us a little bit about how you met Ray Saar and how you helped him at least get the demo tapes available so that he could take this to somebody who would fund the program?
Thank you, Chuck. The name Ray Saar, what a memory jogger. What a kind, gracious genius of an innovator. Before sharing my memories of Ray, you need a little history of the technology at the time. The invention of the cassette machine changed the way salesmen would demo commercials for their clients. 4 tracks and 8 tracks had been in existence for some time, but couldn't really be applied to this usage. Prior to the portable cassette machine, DJs would make demo commercials and the salesman would call the station, and the DJ would then play the demo commercial to the potential customer by holding the telephone up to the speaker in the production room. Not really efficient, but it worked. The relatively small but still bulky cassette machines changed all that. The salesman could take the machine with them and play the demo commercial for the customer. This was much more efficient. My MO when I got off the air at 10 in the morning on KFXM was to go to the Holiday Inn for breakfast. The San Bernardino Medical Society occupied the office adjacent to the KFXM KDUO studios. One day, Ray Saar, who I knew was somehow associated with the medical society, came by my table and asked if we could have a brief meeting in my office. At that meeting, he explained that he had an idea for providing medical information to the public via telephone. People would call in, and an operator would play the pre-recorded tapes. He had written 3 scripts and needed someone to volunteer to record them, put them on cassette, and loan him a cassette machine. I cleared the idea with Al Anthony, and he reluctantly okayed the deal, as long as it was clear that the machine was on loan. That was the origin of Tel Med. Tel Hospital, Tel Law, Tel Consumer all followed. From that small beginning, I went on, over more than 2 decades, to record literally thousands of scripts. I never really understood how Ray was separated from the project. He was the inventor, the founder. The idea was financially very successful. After Ray's exit, poor management and lack of foresight new ownership led to the downfall of Tel Med. Competitors started providing the same services without the need for a human operator. That, in a brief nutshell, is the story of my involvement with Tel Med. Ray Saar was a brilliant innovator and a truly fine gentleman. I mourn his passing. Back to you, Chuck.
All right, Doug, thank you very much for that. That's very insightful, and it's interesting how you happened to run into each other and how you helped him prepare these tapes so that he could do presentations for sponsors, which eventually, of course, paid off. Now, Dick, you talked about, at your home, and I was there many times, you had your own room that was outside of the main house, and it had its own private entrance. And it had your own bathroom, and you came home one day and went into your room, and what did you see?
Well, I walked into my room and I found all my clothes from my closet thrown on my bed. Everything was out of my closet. Everything was completely emptied out on the bed. And he had gone into my closet, emptied it, and took a saw and cut a big hole in the wall into the bathroom. And he had installed a little frame with a piece of glass in it. And on the other side in the bathroom was a microphone and on a stand. And in my closet, there was a tape machine. So he had, in effect, turned my closet into a recording studio, my bathroom into a recording studio. And when I walked in there was nobody there, but later there was somebody, I don't remember who, in the bathroom reading from a script being taped on a machine that was stuck in the closet. So I had to completely readjust my lifestyle around that for quite some time, as it turned out. Yeah.
Well, needless to say, your dad was a very resourceful person. In addition to being a very brilliant man about physics and science and all of that, I remember him as being very mechanical. He wasn't afraid to pick up a hammer or a wrench and
nothing at all. Nothing. He took on all projects around the house, and I picked all that stuff up from him. I was the brothers didn't get it. I did. I'm the lucky one.
Yeah. Well, I was, when I would come to visit your home, it was not unusual for him to be in the garage working with a table saw or doing a tune-up on his sports car. At that time, he had a Datsun. Remember Datsun? That's part of Nissan, but Datsun had a Datsun 1200 two-seater sports car, and he would be in there working on doing his own repair work. In fact, he even designed some little thing that there was a knob underneath the steering wheel to where he could adjust the mixture on the carburetor. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we all learned to drive in that car, interestingly enough. Yeah.
So anyway, so a very resourceful man, a very brilliant man. A thing you're going to hear again and again about Raymond Saar, in addition to his brilliance, is that he was a very kind person. He was a good listener, and he truly enjoyed people and would laugh along with them. So anyway, back to Tel Med. So he had this concept, he had this idea, and he would present it to people who thought it was a pretty good idea. And finally, it began to get traction, right? And then the San Bernardino County Medical Society, I think, created some space for him, some offices to where he could build this program. And of course, the San Bernardino County Medical Society offices were at the Holiday Inn near the 10 and the 215 interchange in the Holiday Inn. And then next door to them was KFXM, the radio station. So that made it real convenient for Doug Collins to come over after his morning shift and to narrate more of these tapes.
And it afforded him a place to go every day, and a purpose, as it were. And it also gave him a space to build a small recording booth and get out of my bathroom, back. So that was one of the nice things about it. But then he entered that whole medical world, which was not his world at all. He was alien to that. He was used to being around engineers all day and not doctors.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah, so that had to be something he had to get used to, because there's politics in any medical society. But again, being a brilliant person, let's face it, most physicians are brilliant, so he could certainly relate to them. Now, just to swerve back a little bit, there was I don't know how long the period was between when he was laid off from TRW as an aerospace engineer and when he actually started to get a salary from the medical society. Those are pretty tough times for the family, right?
Sure. Oh, sure. I mean, we all chipped in. We were all old enough. I was working at the A&W out in East Highland, and my sister was I think she was in school, and my brothers were, just getting out of high school right behind me. So we all chipped in and discovered powdered milk and things, weren't the same. There were 5 kids and a horse to feed. So it was quite an adjustment. I don't remember the whole the exact length of the time in terms of days and weeks, but it was, I believe, about 7 months of our lives were changed. I mean, everything had changed from the way we grew up. There was milk in the refrigerator, and there was, I'm not saying we starved to death, because we certainly never had that hit us that hard because of my mother. But, that's the old joke in our family that, oh, does your mom work? No, she has 5 kids. She doesn't work at all. And of course, we know that she worked the hardest of all of us to keep the normalcy in our life, the sense of normalcy. Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of articles in the local papers, The Sun, specifically about the origination of Tel Med and the struggles that your family went through during that time between he was working as an aerospace engineer and actually got the program up and going. And I remember, because I knew your family and I knew your mother, and I saw this in the paper too, that she would stay in touch. Your mom would write handwritten notes to the various creditors and send them $1, just to let them know that she was aware of the obligation, and would tell them that as soon as they got back on their feet, they would catch up on all of this. But I think that had a really profound effect on the creditors. All right, well, these people obviously trying, and they seem to be very serious about making us whole, and that's exactly what happened.
That's entirely new to me. I've never heard that story in my life. I always remember he was the one doing the bills, but of course that sounds like something my mother would do, but I remember my dad did the bills once a month, as I do mine today, once a month. That's it. And he would sit at his desk and open envelopes and do whatever he had to do, and then throw the debris on the floor around him.
So he gets Tel Med up and going. It's this new concept, and I remember reading a lot about it in the local papers, and it really was kind of a sensation. because of, it made the medical information really accessible, and it was free. It was free. So eventually that started to move its way across the country. Other medical societies decided this was a pretty good idea and we need to do something with it. Now, your dad, when he went to the San Bernardino County Medical Society, he pretty much just gave him the program, right?
I wasn't privy to all the backroom negotiations, but he did draw a salary from them for a while. But he was a pretty generous guy in that way, and he was not a real shrewd businessman. That wasn't his forte. It's saying, here, you can have this, but I want this, that, and the other. All he wanted at the time, from my recollection, was a steady check in it. And but there was also a lot of friction. I remember him coming home about, this doctor this or this doctor that, or doctors are a different breed. And it's a lot of, I don't know if competition is the right word, but there's a lot of ego involved. And there was, why didn't I come up with this idea kind of stuff? And he just didn't. It was like he didn't fit the mold. He was smart as them entirely, but doctors have egos, and there was a lot of friction down from. I don't remember him being real happy down there at the medical association.
Well, I remember your father was like a second father to me, as you know, and I also used to appreciate the fact that you used to set an extra plate at the dinner table in case I showed up, and usually I did.
In case?
Yeah, in case I showed up. But your father didn't really have an ego. I never perceived him as having an ego. He was a very bright man. He was cheerful. He was ready to laugh, and he laughed a lot at the antics of your mother, who was a great entertainer. But I thought he was very respectful of other people, and he didn't really have an ego. So that must have been frustrating for him. So what else do you remember about Tel Med after it got going? You indicated that maybe things were a little tense at the office there sometimes.
That's the feeling I got from him when he would come. I was still living at home. I'd been away from home and come back, and you always drift back. As a matter of fact, I don't even think after a while I started living in Riverside in the back of an old grocery store. As a matter of fact, when he built the recording studio, we built out in Riverside, up where the 60 freeway meets the 15.
It's the 215 and the 60.
215.
It's the Columbia off-ramp from the 215, and it was, like you said, an old grocery store with a Quonset hut type roof. And you guys built a recording studio pretty much from scratch. Now, was this after Tel Med?
It was just during that period. It was always a dream of his. He had always been involved in music. He loved recorded music. He had two big reel-to-reel stereo tape machines in the den that he was always making these tapes that would last for 4 or 5 hours. There was always music in the house. And the recording studio, we started building it they were just right hand in hand, right around the same period of time. And he thought that that Tel Med would bring a lot of business into that, he could sell studio time to the Tel Med organization, that would be a way of financing the studio, because building something from scratch isn't cheap, and especially something like that. There was no recording studios from San Diego to LA. You had to go to LA or San Diego, and the Inland Empire had I've heard of a few little ones since then, but I never saw them. And ours was the first and the biggest.
In the Inland Empire.
In the Inland Empire, yeah.
Let's go back to Tel Med. So your dad I worked for him for a few months at Tel Med, editing scripts, sending letters to doctors, asking if they would write a script, and then we would get them, and then we would edit them so that they would be easier to narrate. But there was a point there after about a year or so that the politics started to catch up to your dad, and they tried to push him out. And I remember there being a heated board of directors meeting with the medical society, and he survived that. But it seems like about another, later, there was another one, he did not survive that. So he was pushed out, and then they kept Tel Med.
Exactly. There was somebody down there who he was butting heads with, which is strange because he didn't butt heads with many people. I mean, he usually got along with almost everybody he met, and he didn't have a whole big gang of buddies that he ran around with and did things on the weekends. He was always working, or he was always working at the house. But there was somebody down there, and that name is stuck in the back of my head. If I heard it, I would recognize it. But for the life of me, I don't know who it was. But somebody was down there that he was butting heads with, and I know that name, but I can't think of it. But it was not a nice name when we heard it in the house. It was somebody was pushing him out away from his own idea.
Yeah, and so, but your dad was recognized nationally for being the
inventor
of this. In fact, you indicated that he received a big award, right, from recognition from the Vice President of the United States.
The Vice President of the United States. He got a public award. I have it someplace. I haven't been able to locate it because you didn't give me enough lead time, but from the Honorable Spiro T. Agnew, our vice president at the time, for the best. He got an award for the best public information dissemination service in the United States, in the whole United States, given to him by Spiro. I wish I could have found it. I have it. Should be hanging.
So that's good. At least he got some. He didn't make any money out of it, but he got the recognition. But
he got the recognition.
Yeah. So, but again, it all started in San Bernardino in the Inland Empire and in the brain of your brilliant father. Your father was, like you said, a very creative type man. He had an appreciation for music, as you indicated previously. And I think one of his friends, it could have been a college roommate, was a fellow by the name of Jack Dougherty. Could you tell us about Jack Dougherty and how your dad was connected with him? And
he was, Dougherty was also a rocket guy, one of those guys that put the rockets up. The picture of the big room with all the semicircle desk and the tiers going up, and all those guys in the long sleeve white shirts with the black ties on sitting there. That was their world. But he was also my dad's musical buddy. My dad would drag mostly me, down to LA a lot to go to all these famous jazz clubs with his buddy Dougherty. Listen to music, the famous guys. I mean, I saw all those great musicians growing up.
These are mostly jazz musicians, right?
Mostly jazz musicians, yeah. That's what the hip guys were listening to in the 50s, man. Yeah, jazz. And so Dougherty came up with this band. He called my dad and he said, I'm putting this group together, and I'm putting up 2,500, and I need 2,500 from you, and you can have half of this group. And so we went down to A&M Studios, my father and I, and it was the Carpenters. So. And they were recording their very first record, and we spent 3 days with those with really nice kids. They were my age, but they weren't doing my age music. My age music was Led Zeppelin and The Who, and that whole world. And they were doing, well, Carpenters music.
Pop music, pop.
Yeah, kind of square. So my dad, he didn't go for the deal. He was building his own studio at the time, and I remember them talking about it over dinner or something. I just can't swing the money. I don't have the money, and good luck, Jack. And they went their different ways. And that could have turned out way different.
So what happened to the Karen and Richard Carpenter is all.
Oh, they explode. Their first album went nowhere, and my dad kind of said, "Look at this, I told you so." And then along came Close to You, and they exploded across the whole world. And they had their own TV show.
Yeah, for sure. So a missed opportunity there. Now, your dad also was involved for a short time with concert promotion, and one of his partners was Don McCoy.
Yeah, I'm probably the only guy in the whole world that could look you in the face and say, I ran into my father at a Led Zeppelin concert. And I did, right there, Swing Auditorium. There he was. Isn't that your dad? What? Yeah. And that he wanted to see what people were listening to and what was hip and what the kids were going to, and the kids being us, his own 3 sons, and my little sister was too small to be involved in that. But he got a band on the second time Zeppelin played. He got a band that he had promoted that he had founded at the Holiday Inn in Riverside. It was the bar band, very square guys, and doing cover tunes, and he tried to turn them hip. I'm not going to mention any names, but he tried to hey, let's change your clothing, grow your hair. We're going to get you on the bill with Led Zeppelin. And he did. They opened up for Led Zeppelin at the Swing Auditorium. But that wasn't his, that whole world is a world of real cutthroat people. So I don't think he enjoyed it as much as he was doing other things. And then later on, aerospace kicked back in and started back up again slowly. And he eventually drifted on back into working on the space shuttle. And that's what he did. That's what he really loved. I still don't know what he did. Never allowed to tell us.
Your dad was the constant tinkerer. You've said that previously. He was usually out in the garage doing things, and he worked on quite a few inventions that he was trying to bring to market. One of them was an onion peeler? And how did that come to be?
My mother complained one night. She was peeling onions in the kitchen, and I remember it. She said, I hate peeling onions. I hate this job and what it does to my eyes. And he got up and he went out into his garage and he invented an onion peeler. And it took him 7-8 months to do. And there were onions all over the house. We were eating onions with every meal, and bags of onions everywhere, and the whole place smelled like onions. But he came up with this contraption that you put an onion in it and press down the handles, and by God, there it was, peeled, sliced, diced, done. And he enjoyed the process more than the tinkering, the inventing process than he did coming up with a solution. He invented a little machine for a tennis racket that would tell you exactly when you hit the ball in the sweet spot of the racket. And some other various things. I mean, we were the very first family ever that I was aware of. And this was when we lived in Lancaster, when we got a television, which was a big deal. We're the first family ever to have a remote control. He hated commercials. When he did watch TV, he hated them. So he went and he cut a hole in the wall and got into the back of the TV and just broke the circuit to the speaker. And there was this cable running through the den where we watched TV, and with just a simple little switch on the end of it, and he could turn the sound off. Way before the remote control was invented, he could turn off the sound of it, and he was very proud of that. But that's little things like that. And there were speakers all over the house, and speakers in the garage, and speakers in the backyard. And I'm like that today. And I picked up some of those traits from him, and the tinkering bit too. He certainly didn't watch much TV. He never watched football games or spent his weekends playing golf. He was always building, doing something.
So your dad obviously was very, very curious about the current trends in music, especially rock music. And you saw him at the Led Zeppelin concert because he really was curious about the current music. But tell us about an experience you had when the doorbell rang at your home and you answered the door, and who was on the front porch?
Lee Michaels was standing on my front porch, and we were all big fans of his. We had, my brothers and I, we had his records. We went to his concerts. But I never, in my wildest dream, expected to meet him on my front porch. And he said, "Is Ray Saar here?" And I was like, yeah, come on in. I was stunned. And so him and my dad became, I have pictures of him at our studio, of him and my dad doing things. And of course we had a B3 out there. He did all his recording at A&M down in Hollywood, but he did some little goofing around stuff with us and my dad. I have pictures of my dad and Lee Michaels at the board mixing stuff, and my dad's wearing a suit and tie. I could never, but that was that generation. You couldn't get them out of their suits and tie, just about. But yeah, that was an experience. And he became, Lee Michaels is still around. He has a sushi shop in Santa Monica. And there's a big major star there for a long, long time. Palm Springs Pop Festival, and headlining all over the country. Sweet man.
Yeah. Dick, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on Tel Med, and of course your father, who was an amazing person for a lot of reasons. His brilliance, his kindness of heart. And thank you so much for giving us the inside story about how Tel Med came to be a program that really made a positive difference in the lives of a lot of people, millions of people across the country. So thank you again, Dick.